It's a great pleasure to be with two of the finest scientists and renowned physician, Dr. Deepak Chopra and Dr. Jeremy Richman today. We are going to talk about brain health and fitness. So before I dive deeper into this conversation, I would like to ask from Jeremy to introduce himself.
I'm Jeremy Richman, and I'm a neuropsychopharmacologist. I've been in the drug discovery and academic arena for about 3 decades, and I now am the CEO and co-founder of the IBL Foundation, committed to studying and understanding violence and the risk factors associated with it and the protective factors that lead away from it.
Great. Thank you for being here, Jeremy. And Dr. Chopra, you're a renowned physician, so no introduction needed, but tell us, what are you up to these days?
Well, my background is in neuroendocrinology, but I'm more interested right now in helping with colleagues create a global brain. And that global brain will be on the internet, the neural connections between people who are engaged through personal and social transformation to create a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world. I think we can do it by creating a new neural network in cyberspace.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful to maybe reduce violence and study it. What do you think, Jeremy?
I think that stands to look into. I think it's inevitable, actually.
Today you talk about brain violence and health. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it seems that when you approach the question in this way, people are oftentimes surprised and have that aha moment. The brain is just another organ, like the heart, the lung, the liver, the kidneys, and it can be like them, healthy and unhealthy. But unlike all the other organs, we don't know much about it. We need to recognize, though, that it is the house of our memories, our feelings, and our behaviors. And if behaviors are abnormal, it must therefore be the consequence of organic abnormalities in the chemistry or the structure of this organ, the brain. And when it comes to violence, we don't need to look for sort of magical creators. Violence is an abnormal behavior and must be the consequence of abnormalities in chemistry and structure. And that's something that scientists can work with so that we can study, understand it, and ultimately prevent, intervene, and cure it.
That's great. And Dr. Chopra, how do you think the global brain could actually establish that? Or
the global brain will be a collection of course, human brains.
Yes. Okay.
So it has to be an integrated brain where the midbrain or reptilian brain does what it's supposed to do, take care of autonomic function and enhance survival. And where the limbic brain is cultivated and nurtured through love, compassion, joy, equanimity, and gratitude. And where the cortical brain is enhanced through introspection, imagination, exchange of ideas, and exchange of imagination and creativity, insight and intuition. These are simple contemplative practices that can help rewire the personal and the social and the collective brain for this one goal: more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, joyful world.
That's great. That's great. I think we all cheer for that, and of course Society for Brain Mapping and Therapeutics wants to be part of this, and we are delighted to have you in our World Congress. In terms of your foundation, a little bit more I would like to learn, and for our viewers, obviously it's a very tragic that you had to go through some personal experience of violence for your family, but I want to know what are the new initiatives that you're coming with, and so how can Brain Mapping Foundation can partner with you? How can Society for Brain Mapping and Therapeutics could help you with the policies that you're envisioning to put forward?
Well, that's a good question. So there's a lot of different ways that SBMT can help. As you mentioned, so that you out there understand, the IBL Foundation is named in honor of our daughter Avielle, who was a 6-year-old child murdered in the Sandy Hook Elementary School shootings in 2012. And my wife and I are scientists, and so in response to that horrible tragedy, we committed to looking to find ways to prevent violence and build compassion through neuroscience research, community engagement, and education. Right now, funding to support neuroscience research is actually pretty turned back. There's not a lot of support for neuroscience, and it keeps getting cut back every year. And then when it comes to understanding violence as a study that you can engage in a neuroscience perspective, that's even profoundly more rare. So one way that you're already helping is to get people to engage in the dialogue of studying violence as a legitimate neuroscience study and endeavor. But also I'd like to highlight, which you had so many outstanding already breakout sessions before this, that I want to highlight the technological aspect of this. So it's not just the circuitry and the wet science of classic neuroscience that we need to support, but it's the technology. We need the next modality, technology that can image the brain in an affordable, accurate, approachable, and reproducible fashion, so that you can actually study it in a meaningful way that is accessible to science and research.
I think obviously we are very open to collaboration with your foundation. This is an area of need that we all have to come together under the global brain. But I also know that Deepak, you have your center focus on kind of a brain discovery, but on the global scale. So and the kind of a Chopra Institute or Chopra Center. I would like to learn a little bit more, and kind of we can have a discussion about how we can actually work together, because many foundations and organizations talk about collaboration, but when it actually comes to collaboration, they don't show up.
And
so you are
pat on the back.
Yeah, exactly. So we have reached out to, I don't want to name, but all the famous adjectives and all the syllabus and everything you can call. We have called them to engage, but we're delighted to have you here with your foundation and your institute. So with that in mind, what's your thought about kind of collaboration?
Well, our foundation, Chopra Foundation, is now creating a subdivision called the Mind Brain Institute. Mm-hmm. And we are focusing only on one thing as a predictor of behavior, and that is chronic inflammation. So inflammation in the mind, which manifests as hostility, anger, jealousy, grievances, resentments, guilt, shame, mistrust, depression. They're all variations of not being connected to life, basically. Mm-hmm. When you are connected to the ecosystem of existence, you feel love, compassion, joy, equanimity, peace, gratitude. So we're looking at inflammatory markers as the common denominator in almost every chronic illness, except for the 5% of those disease-related gene mutations that are fully penetrant. The rest are linked in one way or another to inflammation as a common background, whether it's diabetes, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, you name it, cancer, autoimmune illness, there's inflammation in the background. But inflammation has a mental component, which has a brain expression. If we can figure out all the ways to decrease inflammation, including simple things like good sleep, meditation and stress management, movement, yoga, breathing practices, cultivating healthy emotions, proper nutrition for the microbiome, even contact with nature and grounding practices, we feel that for the first time we have a handle on at least one aspect of not only chronic illness but also violent behavior. As was said earlier, violence is the number one epidemic of our civilization. It's not only an epidemic, it's a public health problem. We have to actually classify violence as a public health disease. And it begins with inflammation in the mind, whatever the situation or circumstances that led to that. Earlier on, you were speaking about childhood trauma and children who don't get attention, affection, appreciation, acceptance, or who are somehow abused verbally or physically or sexually. That initial trauma creates the programming for basically an inflamed mind for the rest of the life, and ultimately results in violence. We cannot separate the mind from the brain from the mind, and we cannot separate brain-mind from aspects of our behavior, our social interactions, our personal relationships. They're all influenced by what's happening in the brain, body, mind. I think we should stop using words like body or mind. Body, mind, brain are a single unit, just like space-time is a single entity, or mass energy, or wave particle. You don't now separate those. Brain, mind cannot be separated.
It's interesting that you bring brain inflammation. We actually have an entire session on brain inflammation and Alzheimer.
Yes.
And neurodegenerative disorder.
Right.
Long ago, when you were talking about this, people would think it is kind of a science fiction. Now that science catch up with you, people just realize that you were kind of ahead of time. So we're really delighted to see that your institute is moving to that direction, but also the doctor who actually discovered brain has a lymphatic system. Dr. Kipnis is on the program, and so he's one of the recipients of our Pioneer in Medicine Award. And again, he physically showed the importance of immunity in the brain,
Yes.
and how that impacts our brain in terms of neurological disorder, distress, and behavior. So I think it's amazing that you're pushing that boundary and connecting that to brain violence. I think it's an exciting subject. Don't you think so?
Absolutely, yeah. There's always the suggestion of connections to things like inflammation, adverse childhood experiences, toxicants in the environment. That we know are scientifically established risk factors. Then we have to take the next step and actually look under the hood and see why are they risk factors and what are they doing.
I think the future, by the way, for research of this kind is collaborative research. And it doesn't have to be just neuroscientists. Sometimes it's a big disadvantage to have specialists who can only see through the lens of their specialty. If you take neuroscientists, generalists, humanitarians, musicians, artists, storytellers, and neuroscientists, put them all together, give them a problem, let them incubate, I think there will be what is called emergence. Emergence happens when there is a diversity of talent, where there's a shared vision, and where there is an opportunity to listen to everyone, keep the system totally transparent and open, then something emerges. And I feel that what needs to emerge right now, very much so, is the global brain.
Right. So that's music to my ear, because I was going to say that I thought that you're going to say that's called SBMT, because that's what we do here. We bring a physicists of different backgrounds.
You map it. You
exactly.
Map it.
Yeah.
But the action, the real action, is in shared consciousness right now.
Absolutely. So I think this is exactly the vision that we share, and I'm glad to see that your organization and your institute is sharing the same vision. And as you saw, we have NASA scientists and physicists and chemists and neurosurgeons and
Perfect
neurologists
setup for diversity
together.
and collaboration with diverse.
So we are absolutely ready for your global brain, Dr. Chopra. So before we kind of wrap up our conversation here, I want to know what's your take on, let's say, funding cycles and kind of how do we fund this effort? How do we ask for philanthropists to support this? Do we need to work together, come up with the policies or some sort of a legislation? What's your thought, Jim?
As with everything, there's no satisfying answer because it's probably all of those. Mm-hmm. I don't think that gone are the days where we can just depend on the government to take care of us and hand us everything that we need. That's just not effective anymore, and there's not enough money to affect what we need to. We do need to rely on them to enact the policies that respond to the discoveries in an appropriate fashion. However, we need to find a way to incentivize non-government philanthropic entities to see that there is a return on investment that might not be financial, or if we could get creative and figure out how to make it financially create financial returns. But however we do it, we need to find ways to focus finances behind concerted efforts to support consortiums and collaborations so that they can effectively drive change. Because the unfortunate reality is it's not just rolling up your sleeves. Willing is not enough. We must do, and a lot of times that requires a lot of finance.
And I think to that, I would say maybe sharing resources.
Absolutely.
You are effective in this area of violence and brain. We are in some sort of a technology-driven group, and then we have Dr. Chopra's group who are basically focusing on the global brain. So bring it all together, sharing resources, and then we can probably ask from government to put funding. But also I want to know how can we engage, maybe, I wouldn't say celebrities, but philanthropists or groups like, let's say, for the sake of argument, Elon Musk of the world and kind of Bill Gates of the world.
I think if you really look hard, which I have done, you'll see that almost every family in the world is affected by some degree of depression in somebody in the family, or anxiety or stress. It's not emphasized, but all chronic illness, if you look at it very carefully, it's preceded by some kind of mental distress, whatever we want to call it, depression, low grade or whatever. I personally think an open source funding from families who are affected by violence and mental illness would ultimately be the best source of funding globally. Open source, open system, total transparency, open collaborations, looking at both personalized treatments, prevention, predictability, but also innovative ways. Because as we map out these pathways, we've been mapping pathways genetically, epigenetically, microbiome with these contemplative techniques. And now what is suddenly happening is that pharmaceutical companies and other people are interested in the IPs for these metabolic pathways. Right. And there are technology companies, and technology right now, photonic simulation, sound simulation, binaural beats, intracranial ultrasound. This is just the beginning. VR, augmented reality, virtual reality, to enhance brain health. There'll be a lot of interest when we can link commerce, IPs, and people affected by mental illness and violence in the world. You put them all together, and then you go for it, which is what I've done in all my life. I've never depended on government funding, not even on philanthropists, actually, but just creating this global conversation where people say, you know, I'm affected by that. I'd like to see a cure for depression, or I'd like to see a cure for
Create a
this.
cause for it.
To go deeper into the dynamics of it. So I see technology. I see industry coming together around this. I see new IPs being developed. I see open source funding. I see philanthropists who have been affected by these incidents. Because you look at all the philanthropy, it's about, you know, my uncle or my father died of Alzheimer's, so I'm now funding it. So when you bring together all these people who are directly affected by these issues, then you have funding. I've never had problems with that in the past. I don't see problems in the future. In fact, I think governments and industry and technology will follow.
Correct. Actually, in this conference, as you saw, Dr. Chopra, who's Under Secretary for Commerce, is coming and giving a talk. And we have started this Brain Technology Innovation Park initiative to exactly do that and kind of bring Department of Commerce to this. And people will say, why commerce? I say, well, all of the United States patents falls under commerce. So it's not under NIH. So NIH is great in what they are doing. I'm not sure, but I would say that. But I think we need to get other organizations involved, as you said. So, and also resource sharing between your foundation and us. And so we are the grassroots, in my opinion. And if we can work together hand to hand, there is no problem we can't solve.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, well, thank you very much for being with us, and I much appreciate it. And I hope that our viewers can visit us more often on worldbrainmappingtv.com.